A century after the conquest of Mexico, the Aztecs who survived the original conquest continued to live in remote rural villages. And while the church was pretty relaxed when it came to sending missionaries such as friars, priests, bishops to evangelize, to introduce Christianity to this new native population, they were pretty okay as long as the people were following the basic sacraments. One particular area of southern Mexico was studied by Hernando Ruiz de Alarcon back in the early 17th century. And because of his very determined and rather aggressive program of collecting Aztec religion, that we have this volume on the practices that were still being performed this far into the colonial period. So even after a century of conquest, there were many aspects of the Aztec religion that were still being practiced. And this was a deep concern for Hernando Ruiz de Alarcon because he saw this as a corruption of the true Christian faith. And so he actually went about many of the villages between the southern states of Morelos and Guerrero, and in order to find out what they were still doing pertaining to the traditional ancient Aztec religion. And he found that they were, in many places, following traditional healing rituals, divination, oracles, beliefs in magical beings such as witches, shapeshifters, vampires, and many other kinds of superhuman beings. And so he wanted to combine all of these discoveries. He wanted to assemble all of these surviving beliefs into a single volume so that he could present it to the Christian authorities and say, look, these people are still practicing idolatries that have no place in the Christian church. And if they're going to be true Christians, we need to identify these contaminations, these old vestiges of their ancient religion, and in order to remove them. So while he was composing this volume in order to ultimately extricate, to remove and eradicate those remnants of the Aztec religion, we today are using these in order to attempt to reconstruct what the Aztecs were practicing, and largely from the rural communal perspective. A lot of what these rituals entail pertain to the survival of the communal life. This was the kind of magic that the villagers were doing. And it has much to do with matters of divination, oracles, health, healing, food production, hunting. These were things that related to the survival of the human body as well as the survival of the culture and the society. And we have to be very careful with this work. This is one of the most controversial works that scholars have used in order to reconstruct traditional Aztec religion, because Ruiz de Alarcon was not reserved with some of the more questionable and unethical means of collecting his information. We have cases where he collected a material on sword point or through deception. And so in some cases, it was with great distortion. So we have to be very careful with this, and because of the rather unethical ways by which much of this material was collected, which is unfortunate, because on the one hand, this can tell us a great amount of the kinds of ritual and magical practices that the Aztecs were continuing to use into the colonial period, and that could relate to traditional, like say, domestic magic from before the conquest. But we have to be very careful with this. The Hassig and Andrews edition is very important because it is a thorough exploration of the original Nahuatl and comparing it with the transcription from Ruiz de Alarcon himself. And you can see some examples where the text has first his Ruiz de Alarcon's attempt to write it in Nahuatl, and then his own translation into Spanish. And then Andrews and Hassig provide their own transcription, how the Nahuatl should have originally read, and their own more direct and literal translation that avoids the bias and some of the errors in Ruiz de Alarcon's original translation. The University of Oklahoma edition also has not only the original six treatises that by which this book is organized, but also a number of appendices, such as some of the major gods and goddesses that are evoked through these rituals, and also even a glossary of the ritual terms, the magical and ritual practitioners, and some of the various phrases and ideas that we have to understand in order to realize the ways in which the rural Aztecs of the 17th century were reckoning and practicing magic. The Ruiz de Alarcon's treatise has been heavily studied, especially for the role of language in Aztec ritual. The language in these works is heavily metaphoric and deeply symbolic. It often invokes references to mythical episodes, or it uses language in order to transform modern, like say, contemporary or just mundane objects into things of literally mythical power. And they will use this by evoking the names of powerful gods, or they will even use some of the number and day sign aspects of the calendar in order to now give whatever instruments they're trying to enhance a literally mythical level of power. And so this work has been especially useful for understanding the ways in which language could be used in order to evoke ritual and magical power in the Aztec world.